no public institution should be accepting sponsorship from organizations that contribute to the injustice and discrimination faced by any peoples, and in particular those who are in the global south. But neither should a public institution or a museum be holding on to pillaged and stolen goods that were taken during the British Empire, during colonial rule, which have a direct link with the enslavement and murder of African people, with the stolen goods and with the stolen lands that we know have happened historically. For example, the Benin bronzes that are placed here in the British Museum should not be here. Ironically, part of our tour is supposed to take in the Africa galleries. And because they knew that we were coming, the British Museum closed the Africa galleries. So the irony of people from the African diaspora coming here to speak about our history and how that's impacted on us historically, but also to the current day, and denying us access to those galleries that actually house the artifacts that were taken from our ancestors, is pretty shocking, really, that they've done that and denied us that access. And when we talk about climate change, how BP contribute to climate change, there is a direct link between climate displacement, migration, racism, and the history of colonialism. And many of the workers here at the British Museum are migrant workers, are black and brown workers, whether they're first generation or second generation. And the reason they are here is because Britain was there, stealing our lands, stealing our wealth. And that has contributed to the situation we find today, where people are being displaced because of climate change, but also because of the legacies of colonialism that have led to poverty and to conflict and to war. And those combined impacts have led to people coming here to the UK to make their life, contributing to British society, contributing to the economy, and working here in the British Museum and in other museums and galleries and public institutions, but finding themselves actually in a three-tier workforce. Here in the British Museum, there are workers employed by the museum. There are workers who are employed by outsourced and privatized companies, and there are also agency workers. And those workers who have been outsourced and those workers who work for agencies, they earn less than the workers who are employed here, and their terms and conditions are worse. And PCS, my union, have been campaigning to say all of these jobs need to be brought back in-house and people need to be treated equally. And disproportionately, it's black and brown and migrant workers who are in those jobs who are earning less pay and are on worse terms and conditions. Like many institutions in the UK, the British Museum was amongst those who jumped on the Black Lives Matter slogan whilst those protests were happening last summer, and did so to try and declare their anti-racist credentials. But in reality, they paid lip service. And I want to share with you an extract of a statement that was issued publicly by one of the directors of the British Museum on behalf of the museum, because I find it quite stunning and shocking that they said this in light of everything they do. So this is the extract I want to share. So this was published in 2020 in the midst of the Black Lives Matter protests that were happening globally. The British Museum stands in solidarity with the British Black community, African American community, with the Black community throughout the world. We are aligned with the spirit and soul of Black Lives Matter everywhere. The spirit and soul, just focus on that for a moment. I'll come on to say something about that. We stand with everyone who is denied equal rights and protection from violence. These are challenges that we as a society must address, injustices that must be overcome. So when they talk about the spirit and soul Are they reflecting on the spirit and soul of my ancestors and other people from the African diaspora and Asian diaspora's ancestors whose lives were taken, who were tortured, whose land was taken, whose artifacts were taken and placed in here, still sitting here all these years later? Because if you're talking about spirit and soul, and you are trying to align yourself with the Black Lives Matter movement, that has to include, doesn't it, not contributing to climate change that leads to people in the global south being displaced. It has to include ensuring that black and brown people are paid equally, are treated equally in the workplace. And our members working here at the British Museum, even when this museum was closed, the security staff and the cleaners had to still come here and work every day, putting themselves at risk. And let's not forget that black and brown people have contracted and died of COVID disproportionately. And many of the cleaners, the majority of the cleaners are women, and they're also people who are disproportionately impacted by long COVID. So they put their lives at risk, they put their families at risk to keep this place safe and to keep it hygienic, whether the galleries are open or closed for everybody. And if we look around us, we can see how completely spotless this place is. Look how huge this is to keep clean. And they're paid very little for that work they do. Just behind us there, we've got the canteen where some of our members are working. We have the shop here where our members are working. And these are all services that people take for granted when they come and visit these galleries and this museum. That they can have a cup of tea and a sandwich, they can buy some gifts and tokens of their visit from the shop, that it's safe for them to come in, that COVID measures are in place for them, but nobody really thinks about those workers. So it's important that we remember the workers, and we are fighting and campaigning in PCS for all of that work to be brought back in-house. And I want to say something about not just the legacies. I've been talking about the legacies of discrimination and racism and colonialism. The reason we have institutional racism in the UK today is because of those legacies. And if Britain, including this institution, the British Museum, are serious about addressing racism that we face today, you also have to address the legacies of colonialism and racism of the past. And so whilst the galleries are closed, the Africa galleries are closed, and that's outrageous, actually now they're closed. My message to the British Museum is pack up the artifacts in there and give them back. Don't bother opening them up again. Yeah. That's what they should be doing. And let us not forget that we face institutional racism as black and brown people in the workplace, in service provision, in education. And actually just this week, the government sought to deport 90 people on a charter flight mass deportation to Jamaica. The descendants, the children and grandchildren of people of the Windrush generation who have already faced a huge injustice. So they were happy to go and enslave my ancestors. They were happy for us to come and do labour in Britain post-World War II. And now they say, you don't belong in this country. But when our families came here, we were told, you are part of the British Empire. This is the mother country. Well, what mother treats their children like that and deports them and tears them apart from their families and leave them destitute in a country they don't know and have never known? So we must stand up for everybody who works here. We must stand up against the legacies of colonialism and racism, but we also need to build a positive legacy for the next generation coming through, the next generation of workers, the next generation of visitors to these galleries, because people come from across the world to visit the museum, and for the next generation of black people, because when we walk into these galleries and see these artifacts, we're not looking at them and thinking, this is amazing, this is beautiful, isn't it wonderful that these things are here? This is a reminder of our pain and trauma that has been passed to us through generations that we're still living through. So it's not acceptable to accept BP sponsorship, and it's not acceptable to keep those artefacts. Give them back, British Museum. So I have a statement to read. Members of my union who work here, the PCS members working here, they wanted me to share a statement with you that they wrote in 2019 when one of the trustees of the museum resigned. Adaf Suef resigned because of all the things I've been just talking about. And this is the statement that PCS members issued. Following the recent resignation of Adaf Suef from the British Museum's Board of Trustees, PCS British Museum branch stand in solidarity with Ms. Suef and her brave and principled decision. Her actions highlight once again the troubling nature of the relationship between BP and the arts. Through its sponsorship of our most prestigious cultural institutions, BP is allowed to propagate the myth that without its existence, we would not have access to the collections of our publicly funded museums and galleries. As a member of the Art Not Oil Coalition, we reiterate our position that access to culture is a human right, not a privilege bestowed by large corporations. The British Museum aims to hold for the benefit and education of humanity a collection representative of world cultures. Its association with BP is not compatible with this objective when the collection is being used to greenwash the activities of a company whose actions threaten lives world over, both now and in the future. Climate change and its effects will be most sharply felt in the global south, and the relationship of south to north is also touched upon by Ms. Suef in the context of repatriations. As a union with a membership whose personal histories are intertwined all across the globe, it's important for our workplace to represent all of us in the same way that the collection should represent world cultures. The divisions in our country as a whole are rooted in part with an inability to reconcile with our colonial past. The museum as an institution is in a unique position, and given its own history has a unique obligation to lead those difficult discussions. We echo Ms. Suef's call for the museum to take a clear position as an ally of upcoming generations. Lastly, we thank Ms. Suef for drawing attention to the precarity faced by outsourced workers. The treatment of individuals employed by Carillion emphasises the importance of unions in the struggle against privatisation right across our public services. PCS will continue to fight for the rights of all workers being employed directly and indirectly across the public sector. PCS British Museum thank Ms. Suef for raising these points and calls on the remaining trustees to make every effort to address the inadequacies raised. Thank you.